All right, welcome back to the deep dive. And wow, the material you sent over for this one is, it's really something. We're going to be talking about a subject that, well, it's usually considered a bit taboo.
It is. We're talking about the foundational brain chemistry of commitment, of marriage.
Exactly. And our mission today is to just follow this material and see where it leads deep into the implications of that chemistry.
That's absolutely right. And we need to be really clear about our focus here. This is going to be a purely evidence-based exploration looking at the biological and hormonal changes that happen in a man's brain when he commits to a monogamous relationship.
And contrasting that with polygamy.
And contrasting that with what the source material theorizes happens in a polygamous structure. We are, for all intents and purposes, acting as impartial reporters here. We're just unpacking the science that the sources use to back up these long-held ideas about male behavior.
And the central idea, the thing that the source material really digs into, is honestly, it's arresting. It suggests there is measurable scientific evidence that marriage, and specifically monogamous marriage, causes a profound physical shift in men's hormone levels.
Yeah. The original authors said they were beyond astonishing at the findings.
I can see why. It completely reframes how you might look at history, at ethics, even at the spiritual idea of loyalty.
It creates a direct chemical link, a link between the type of relationship and the actual internal wiring of the man in it. And the material, very wisely, I think, offers a kind of cautionary note.
A trigger warning.
Right. It basically says, look, talking about biology and sex-specific hormones, it can run counter to a lot of current social narratives. People can see it as not politically correct.
But the goal here isn't to be politically correct or incorrect.
Not at all. The source material's commitment is clear. You have to align your theories with the observable facts, with biology, with endocrinology. So what we're doing today is charting this chemical journey of a man's brain as he pivots from one drive, the drive for status, to another, the drive for bonding.
Okay, so let's start where the source material does. Before all the hard science, there was this behavioral hypothesis. They called it monogamous discipline.
Yeah, and it's a really insightful term, isn't it? It suggests a kind of internal mental training.
Like exercising a muscle.
Exactly. The theory is that men who really embrace monogamy, who genuinely value their commitment, they have to intentionally cultivate specific mental habits, specific ways of thinking.
And the source argues these habits are. They're completely alien to someone outside that mindset.
Completely foreign is the phrase they use.
Yeah.
And they use historical figures like King David as the classic example of the non-monogamous man.
Okay, so let's make this practical. The source uses a really relatable example.
Yeah.
A man notices an attractive woman, say, in a coffee shop.
Right. For a single man, or, and this is the crucial part, a man whose brain is still wired for what the source calls competitive acquisition, that internal monologue kicks in immediately.
The status-seeking program starts running.
Instantly. The brain starts running calculations rooted in the dominance hierarchy. Is she available? Am I in her lead? Who else is looking? Who's my competition? It's this rapid evolutionary cascade designed to assess status and, potential reproduction. The brain is in acquisition mode.
So the core of this monogamous discipline is basically hitting the pause button on that program.
It's an intentional intervention. The committed man feels that instinct. He recognizes that calculation's starting to run, but he has to consciously interrupt it. He has to stop it.
And the source says that's harder for guys who are newly married.
Of course. Because those old status-seeking pathways in the brain are still very active. They're well-worn roads. The discipline is about choosing not to go down that road.
And that choice, that's what changes the chemistry.
That's the theory. That intentional action, the conscious choice to tamp down those thoughts and to redirect his focus, that's what creates the neurological shift. By repeatedly choosing loyalty over acquisition, by focusing on his existing bond, he is literally retraining his brain's reward system.
Which unleashes a totally different set of hormones.
A completely different set.
So this isn't just a one-time moral choice. It's more like a long-term neurological remodeling project.
Precisely. The source theorizes that this discipline, when it's practiced for years, for decades, it becomes automatic. It becomes deeply ingrained. I mean, just think about the neurological difference between a man who's been married for 6 months and is still actively fighting those impulses,
right,
versus a man who has been faithful for 40 years. That 40-year married man is operating from a completely different base setting. That discipline has fundamentally molded his physiological responses.
Okay, now let's bring in the big contrast from the source, King David. He's presented as the polar opposite. The mindset of, what was the phrase? A massive sense of entitlement.
David's story, as the source interprets it, is a perfect example of the non-monogamous brain in action. He had multiple wives, multiple concubines. The culture allowed a man of his status almost unlimited access to women.
So every woman was seen as a potential acquisition.
There was no internal mechanism telling him to restrain himself, no need for that intentional redirection. So his action, lustfully watching Bathsheba, sending for her for a one-night stand, it isn't just a moral failure.
It's an operational failure.
It's an operational failure to exercise the discipline required of a monogamous partner. He had no internal reason, based on his marital structure, to stop that status-driven acquisition process from running to its conclusion.
And the source is careful here to clarify the purpose of this discipline. It's not about shame.
No, not at all. Shame and self-hatred are framed as unproductive, even spiritually damaging. This discipline is framed as a positive, constructive action. The goal is to build a mindset that's beneficial for everyone.
For the man, for his family, for the whole society.
Exactly. It's an affirmation that this monogamous mindset is a valuable, intentionally created state. And overcoming temptations to protect that bond isn't just morally good, it's functionally beneficial.
Okay, this is a perfect transition then. From the theory of behavior to the hard science of it, the endocrinology.
And this is where we hit that trigger warning again. The source acknowledges the political difficulty of discussing sex-specific hormones, but it insists on aligning these theories with, and I'm quoting, truth and biology and fact.
And the place to start, obviously, is testosterone. The source calls it, very simply, the man's hormone.
It's fundamental. Men have, on average, about 20 times the circulating testosterone or T that women do. It's the engine of male physical development.
Right. It triggers puberty, deepens the voice.
Greater bone and muscle density, the development of those fast-twitch muscle fibers that are good for explosive power, body hair. But the physical effects are really only half the story.
And this is a key point in the material. It moves beyond the simple idea that T just equals aggression.
That's the critical nuance. It's not about blind, aimless aggression. T's true function, at least in humans, is far more sophisticated. It's tied specifically to status and dominance.
So aggression is just a tool to get status.
It's a tactic. Aggression only really comes into play if it's the most effective way to achieve status in that particular social structure. In our society, status is usually gained through competence or wealth or power, not just by, getting into fights.
The source says that in modern societies, T makes men hyper-focused on the dominance hierarchy, or what it also calls the competence hierarchy.
And it turns life into this constant, almost subconscious assessment of rank. T is what motivates men to achieve the highest possible level of status, power, and respect.
The source uses a great analogy for this.
It does. It says T makes life feel like a giant game of King of Bunker Hill, where men are just perpetually aware of their rank compared to everyone else. And that hypervigilance is biologically very expensive. It takes a lot of energy.
So why is it so deep-seated? Why this constant obsession with status?
Because, from a biological standpoint, status has always determined access. Access to resources, to protection, and, most importantly for this discussion, access to reproduction. To finding a spouse.
So high status meant a better chance of passing on your genes.
Historically, yes. So T is the hormone that makes sure a man stays highly motivated to climb that ladder and maximize his mating opportunities.
Now here's a really counterintuitive point the source makes. The idea that higher T is better is just plain false.
Absolutely false. The source argues that maximum T levels are actually damaging. They're bad for a stable, complex society, and they're bad for the man's own long-term health. The goal, endocrinologically, is optimal levels.
And what does optimal mean in this context?
It means having enough T to do the job, to provide the motivation and drive for a young man to, establish himself, find a partner, start a family.
But no more.
But no more. Too much T has huge biological and social costs. For example, T is obviously linked to sex drive, but the kind of sex drive it creates is focused on indiscriminate acquisition.
It's about the chase.
The pursuit itself becomes a statement of status. It's a conquest. It's not the deep, devoted love that's required for long-term pair bonding. High T serves the hierarchy, not the home.
Which brings us right back to the monogamous discipline. This is where the behavior meets the chemical reality, the core finding from the scientific studies cited in the source.
It's a bombshell. Married men have lower testosterone than single men. It's a profound, measurable, physiological change.
And the source is very clear that this is a good thing. It says marriage lowers T in very healthy and very important ways for the relationship.
It's as if the commitment itself acts as a signal to the male body, a signal that the search, the competitive phase, is over. The brain can finally stop running that King of Bunker Hill program 24/7.
And the source spends a lot of time detailing why that drop in T is so beneficial for a relationship. Let's really unpack those negatives of chronically high T.
Okay, so the data's pretty clear. High T is strongly associated with poor relationship dynamics. For one, men with higher T levels are statistically less likely to be faithful,
More likely to have affairs.
more likely to have affairs. On top of that, their relational awareness seems to be impaired. High T levels make men, and this is a quote, physiologically remote from their wives.
What does that even mean? Physiologically remote?
It means they're less attuned, less empathetic, and it correlates strongly with a higher likelihood of divorce. It seems like the hormonal drive for status and acquisition is actively working against the stable bonds you need for a marriage.
I have to stop you there because this is so important. Does the source address the chicken and egg problem? I mean, is it possible that men who just naturally have lower T are the ones who are more likely to get married in the first place?
That's an excellent question, and the source does address this. It focuses on studies that track men after they get married. And while, baseline personality is always a factor, the consensus presented in the material is that the act of commitment itself and removing the constant need to compete for a mate is what signals the biological system to power down T production.
So the brain gets the message, mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Shift to maintenance and bonding.
The data on physical harm it's really disturbing. The source cites a major study linking extreme T levels to domestic abuse.
It's a very stark finding. In a study of over 4,000 men, the men in the top 2% of testosterone levels were found to be more than twice as likely to be abusive to their partners as the men in the bottom 2%.
Wow.
It really underlines the dark side of that dominance drive when it's not mitigated by other factors.
And it's not just physical aggression. High T seems to impair the very skills you need to be a good partner.
That's right. High T is linked to lower empathy. It makes men less attendant fathers, and it actually impairs their ability to accurately recognize emotional displays in faces.
So they literally can't read the room.
They can't read their wife's face or their child's face. If a man can't see the distress or sadness in his partner's expression, his ability to be a full participant in that relationship is severely compromised.
So if T is the problem hormone for relationships, there has to be a counter hormone that steps in once that commitment is made.
And there is. This brings us to oxytocin. Oh, the bonding hormone.
Right, which we usually associate with mothers and babies.
We do. Oxytocin is the antidote to T-driven acquisition. It's released in massive amounts in mothers during childbirth and breastfeeding, and it's what creates that immediate, profound bond with the infant.
But the key finding here is that in committed men, the brain chemistry does a 180, T goes down, and O goes up.
And that rise in oxytocin is the physiological mechanism for pair bonding. It fundamentally changes how the man sees his partner. The source says she becomes more precious in their eyes.
It's a chemical infusion of devotion.
It is. It's what provides that deep, satisfying feeling of dedication and faithfulness. It pushes the man away from the T-driven obsession with indiscriminate hunting and pulls him toward loyalty to one person.
And then this whole process gets even more intense when they have a child.
It's a remarkable biological cascade. The source notes that when a man becomes a father, especially if he's present at the birth, his O levels rise and his T levels drop again.
Another drop.
Another drop. This floods the man with the hormones necessary to feel, and I'm quoting, overwhelming protectiveness and responsibility and love. It's what bonds him deeply to both the infant and the mother. The whole system is designed to create and stabilize the nuclear family.
Okay, so now we have to apply this to the other side of the coin. The source is very clear. This T lowering, O rising shift, it does not happen for men in polygamous cultures.
And the reason is baked right into the structure of the practice itself. In a system where success is measured by acquiring multiple wives, where having more wives is the ultimate symbol of status, the man can never leave the hunt.
He can't get off the King of Bunker Hill mountain.
He has to stay on it. He must remain on the prowl, constantly worried about his rank in the dominance hierarchy compared to other men who are also acquiring wives.
So the very nature of polygamy, the need to keep acquiring to maintain status, chemically forces the man to stay high in testosterone.
Exactly. Polygamy, as defined in the source material, keeps the man fixated on that competitive hierarchy. It rewards high T. It actively suppresses the oxytocin rise and the testosterone drop that are the biological foundation of dedicated monogamous bonding. The system prevents the chemical retirement from the hunt.
This is where we zoom out. From the individual man's brain to the whole society. If these hormones are dictating loyalty, status, and protection, what kind of society gets built on each foundation?
And the source uses this incredibly powerful comparison from two different scriptural traditions to illustrate the difference. It contrasts the monogamous Book of Mormon culture with the polygamous Old Testament culture.
So the monogamist ethic is personified by Captain Moroni and his banner, the title of liberty.
Yes. That title of liberty with the words, "In memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, and our wives and our children." The source interprets that as the monogamous man's mantra.
It's an emblem of loyalty.
It's an emblem of loyalty, and look what it prioritizes: the preservation of the immediate bonded family unit right alongside God and freedom.
And this ethic creates a very specific kind of man, one willing to lay down his life to protect his family and his community.
Which the source interprets as a direct manifestation of that oxytocin-driven commitment. It's all about protecting the in-group.
This devotion then creates what the source calls the Nephite ethic of moral warfare.
Exactly. The Nephites are presented as a largely monogamous, oxytocin-driven society, and because of that, their approach to conflict was characterized by, well, profound moral restraint.
The source points to scriptures that define this. They were taught never to give an offense. They didn't start fights.
Never. They would only raise the sword to preserve their lives, their families, their liberty, their religion. It was always a last resort.
The key word there is preserve.
It's all defensive. The Nephite writings are full of justifications for going to war. They clearly felt a deep need to explain why violence was necessary, which shows a very moral, stable, low-T societal profile.
Okay, now for the stark contrast. The Old Testament polygamist war ethic.
And the difference, as the source presents it, is profound. The Old Testament wars are generally characterized not by defense, but by conquest. The goal was expansion and acquisition,
The hallmarks of a status-driven, high-T society.
which created what the source calls an extremely aggressive and even genocidal war ethic.
And the source uses one really chilling detail to hammer this point home, to show the difference between the protective mindset and the acquisition mindset.
It's about the spoils of war. After a conquest, entire communities were sometimes described as being butchered. Men, women, children, except for one group.
The young girls.
The young girls. They were intentionally preserved alive from the complete slaughter. They were kidnapped, and they were systematically taken as polygamous wives for the conquering soldiers.
So that is the ultimate comparison. The Old Testament wars, driven by conquest, end with the acquisition of new wives as a status symbol.
That's it. It shows wives functioning as the ultimate reward for dominance. That is entirely consistent with a testosterone-driven culture. On the flip side, the monogamous culture fights only to defend the wives they already have and cherish. That reflects the bonding and commitment of oxytocin.
Okay, so let's deepen this comparison by looking at the two leaders the source uses as examples. The monogamous warrior, Captain Moroni, and the polygamous king, David.
They're presented as the perfect embodiments of these two opposing hormonal profiles.
The description of Moroni in the Book of Alma it's really something. It positions him as the absolute ideal leader.
The accolades are astonishing. He's a strong and a mighty man, but crucially, his strength is balanced by a perfect understanding. And he did not delight in bloodshed.
His motivations were all about commitment and loyalty. His soul joyed in the liberty and the freedom of his country, and his heart swelled with thanksgiving to his God.
His entire ambition was channeled into the welfare of his people. He labored exceedingly for the welfare and society of his people. He didn't glory in conquest, but in doing good, in preserving his people.
It's a perfect profile of a protective, internally satisfied leader. His drive is for the community, not for himself.
And the final statement of praise from Moroni, it puts him in the highest possible category of human leadership.
If all men had been and were and ever would be like unto Moroni, behold, the very powers of hell would have been shaken forever.
The source interprets Moroni as the perfect embodiment of the monogamist man, a leader whose brain has been thoroughly bathed in oxytocin. This leads to a devotion to his wife, his children, his community, a devotion so profound it fundamentally disrupts evil.
And this analysis leads the source to make a really powerful historical critique. aimed at early church history.
The authors just express genuine amazement. They say, look, when early church leaders were trying to justify polygamy, they completely ignored the example of the monogamist Moroni, the guy whose loyalty could shake the devil's power.
And instead, they used David.
And instead, they focused on the example of the polygamist King David, whose status-driven entitlement led him to adultery and murder.
So the listener is left with this really stark question from the source material. Which hormonal profile, which type of man would you rather have leading you?
The protective, community-focused Moroni, or the status-driven, entitled David. The chemical evidence, according to the source, makes the choice pretty clear.
Okay, so now we take this scientific lens and we point it directly at the historical record. The source argues that the public statements of early polygamist leaders, especially in the Journal of Discourses, show that their brains were being formed different.
That they were being continuously subjected to high T and low O as a direct consequence of the social structure they were building, a structure based on status and acquisition.
And we should be careful here. We're reporting on the source's interpretation of these historical quotes.
Exactly. The thesis analyzes these quotes as demonstrations of what it calls the acquisition mindset. Let's start with Heber C. Kimball. The source pulls quotes that show a shocking devaluation of the marital bond.
The first one is a response to one of his wives. She says something like, "You cannot be exalted without me," suggesting her loyalty is essential for his salvation.
Kimball's reply, as the source interprets it, just dismisses the idea of a unique, sacred pair bond entirely. He says, "They will never affect my salvation, one particle."
One particle.
And he continues. He says if he loses all his wives, he'll just go to Joseph Smith, who will say, "Here are thousands, have all you want."
So women are interchangeable resources.
That's the source's interpretation. The focus is entirely on acquisition and availability, not on a dedicated bond with an individual. It signals severely diminished oxytocin bonding.
Then there's the dominance mindset, where the leader status is more important than the relationship itself.
Kimball again provides a clear example.
Mhm.
One of his wives challenges his authority, threatens to leave because he's supporting Brigham Young over her.
And his response is brutal.
It is. He tells her to leave and be damned, and that very quickly, you poor snoop.
There's no empathy there, no attempt to save the relationship.
The source sees this as textbook high testosterone behavior. It's an extreme, immediate assertion of dominance. Maintaining his status in the hierarchy, his loyalty to Brigham Young, is infinitely more important than the emotional stability of his marriage. The bond is easily discarded when it challenges his position.
The source also brings in quotes that are maybe less officially documented, but are part of the historical record.
Right. It notes that some of these aren't in the Journal of Discourses, but are substantiated by other reports. One is attributed to Kimball. "I think no more of taking another wife than I do of buying a cow."
And he allegedly called wives heifers.
Allegedly. The source is careful to note the potential unreliability of secondhand reports, but it argues that these quotes, true or not, reinforce the overall culture of viewing women as acquisitions and status markers, not as bonded partners.
Okay, let's move to Brigham Young. Here we see the status control mindset actually being written into policy.
Young is very explicit about the lack of agency for women. He dictates that women have no privilege to dictate the husband and tell who or how many he shall take or what he shall do with them when he gets them.
It completely removes their control.
And it forces the man to remain the undisputed top of the relationship hierarchy. But the source really focuses on his counsel to women who were complaining about injustice or abuse.
What was his advice?
He insisted that it was not her prerogative to correct the evil, she must bear that. The source interprets this as the direct institutionalizing of male dominance. The woman is required to submit to the high T hierarchy.
And her reward for bearing it.
This is where the status lens is fascinating. Young promises that women who patiently endure an abusive husband will be taken from him and given to another man of higher status in the next life.
So even eternal reward is based on the man's rank.
Status remains the ultimate currency. Your placement isn't determined by mutual love or fidelity, but by the man's position in the hierarchy.
Young also seems to have openly used his ability to acquire young women as a way to prove his own status.
He did. He boasts openly about his dominance, asking the congregation, "Do you think that I am an old man? I could prove to this congregation that I am young, for I could find more girls who would choose me for a husband than can any of the young men."
That's the king of Bunker Hill talking.
It's the high T brain, using acquisition as proof of competence. The young women are trophies that validate his position.
And finally, this acquisition mindset even extended to new female converts coming into the church.
Kimball's instruction to missionaries leaving on their missions is very telling. He warns them, "You are sent out as shepherds to gather the sheep. And remember that they are not your sheep. Do not make a choice of any of those sheep. Do not make selections before they are brought home and put into the fold."
Don't claim the best ones for yourself before the leaders get their pick.
It's a clear warning against the tea-driven impulse of the lower status men to claim wives before the established hierarchy has had its choice. The source material pulls all of this together by concluding that reading the Journal of Discourses through this lens is like a masterclass in male dominance hierarchies and status acquisition,
A social structure that rewarded a testosterone-dominated brain.
and resulted in too much tea and far, far too little oxytocin in the leadership, which tragically shaped how they valued and treated women.
So our deep dive into this material brings us back to its central conclusion: the actual, measurable physiological reality of a man's brain chemistry.
The tea lowering and O-rising that happens with monogamous commitment is presented as another powerful evidence for the truth of monogamy and the falsehood of polygamy.
It aligns the biological reality with the relational outcome. The source argues that brain chemistry is just one more natural fact that testifies to the truth of monogamy.
Right. It joins things like the natural birth rate, which favors stable monogamous pairs, and the critical need for an engaged father in a child's development.
All things that testify of the truthfulness of monogamy.
But what remains a frustrating gap for the original authors, and this should be our final provocative thought for you, the listener, is the lack of parallel research.
We have all this on men, but what about women?
Exactly. We have these profound, detailed findings on men's brain chemistry in different marital structures, but studies on the corresponding effects on women's brains comparing polygamous versus monogamous women are sorely lacking. The source says this information is really important and absolutely necessary to get the full biological picture.
It's a massive field for future research. And as you reflect on all this, consider the profound ways that biology, history, and chemistry seem to align, revealing the structures that might best support human loyalty, dedication, and societal flourishing. It really makes you think about the need for this kind of scientific inquiry into our most fundamental relationships.